Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the 29th of August 2025. Summer is inexorably coming to a close. We have some pretty interesting stats actually on today's General Staff, Ukrainian General Staff figures for Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, of course. We have very high drone numbers here, 414. I said you would get that today. They kind of split the night into two. The cutoff for getting these figures in happens halfway through the night, so that will not be from last night, although it will partially be some drones from last night, but mainly the massive invasion of drones into Ukrainian airspace from the night before. We'll talk a little bit about that set of strikes on Kiev a bit later. 850 personnel lost, so that's pretty much where it's been recently. Same with the tanks, 4 troop carrying AFVs, 6, and then we have an incredible number of artillery systems, 61. That is well over twice the daily average. I've seen some videos, I'm not going to show you them today, they're just howitzers getting blown up and whatnot. So I have seen quite a few videos of late and even this morning of howitzers getting taken out. So it seems that the Ukrainians are still explicitly plugging away at degrading the Russian artillery capability. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, that kind of fits into the last category as well, and quite a few of these MLRS are being taken out far behind the lines. That one that I showed yesterday was taking out some 50 kilometers plus behind the Dnipro River, down on the coastline of Kherson Oblast, and that could be a drone taking off from an unmanned surface vehicle using that autonomous drone as the sea drone as a repeater. Anyway, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. We have a lot of drones and missiles, as mentioned, and then 109 vehicles and fuel tanks. Pretty high there, but pretty staggering artillery losses there for the Russians. No Andrew Perpetual loss lists today. He's a little bit behind. Gik's on holiday at the moment. But actually, before we go there and before we talk about the losses detailed by Media's own and BBC Russia, Andrew Perpetua says, "It's so frustrating. I fell really far behind this week. Got absolutely drowned in work on Monday and Tuesday because now my death stats are stuck on day 364. Right, just to give you an explanation here, he not only counts up vehicle losses that he sees on all the videos that he and his team survey on a daily basis, and that gives you that list of losses that look like this. This is the one we looked at yesterday. So this is by surveying the entire plethora of videos he comes across, but he also puts this number up here, 92 deaths, and that was for the August the 26th, which is to say that on that particular day, Andrew Perpetua himself personally, or him and his team, saw 92 Russian soldiers die explicitly in videos. And as macabre as that is, he records that statistic because actually, just like materiel, there is a usefulness to understanding trends and what's going on, and you can piece together what might be taking place on the front lines, etc., etc. Now, that statistic then gives you, he says in the last 364 days he has seen 43,135 people die, Russians die, which is staggering. He talks about this here. If you want a preliminary death count, 43,222 in the last 365 days. We have 87 dead for yesterday, but only 2/3 of the videos have been analysed, so it could go up a bunch. And this is a staggering statement. He says, "Seeing 43,000 dudes die with my own eyes is honestly pretty crazy. That's like a football stadium worth of guys who signed up to genocide people for money." I actually replied to that. I said, "I wonder whether you've seen more people die individually with your own eyes than anyone else in the world." Eek. It is an important thing that Andrew and his team does, but it's also something that risks mental scarring, and seeing that phenomenal number of people dying by scouring these videos is that's got to hurt. But it's also a very important data point. Like, he in 1 year has seen 43,000. So we know that the benchmark minimum for number of people dying in Ukraine, give or take, is 43,000. Well, actually, this is kind of what is not what Mediazzona and BBC Russia do, because they do a very different style of analysis, which is looking at the social media declarations, looking at obituaries, and finding out people's names, people who have definitely died as a result of the war. And they've got quite strict criteria for counting people here. So this is an absolute benchmark minimum. Now, what they have found is that Russian losses amount to nearly 220,000 killed as of August, according to these two entities. Now, that's not the actual. So the actual 100% minimum number of people that died is 125,681. So those are the names that they've recorded, but then they do a bit of calculation because they know that's incredibly conservative. For example, it doesn't include LPR and DPR, so the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics and the militias being used there. It will be a big undercount because of the strict criteria they use. Doesn't take into account missing in action. So Russian losses, they reckon, therefore amount to nearly 220,000. So 219,000 is their estimate, adding on to what they know for sure is the number. So, or at least the number. So some 219,000 Russian soldiers were killed in the war in Ukraine. Mediazzona and Medusa have reported, and that's with the work they're doing with BBC Russia, basing the calculations on the list of verified deaths and other data. So then extrapolating that. So here is Rob Lee's reporting of it. BBC Russia and Mediazzona have recorded the names of 125,681 Russian soldiers who were killed in Ukraine. Using a probate registry, they estimate the total Russian killed in action figure is approximately 219,000. So, looking at official government figures of probates based on excess male mortality. So you can look at, what the deaths were prior to the war, look at the spike and see them as excess deaths. And this is kind of what happened in the pandemic, trying to work out excess deaths that therefore could be attributed to the pandemic in one way or another. Jakub Janowski from Oryx says, and this is ignoring all the missing in action, those whose death isn't likely to be noticed or publicly mourned, like prisoners and those joining to avoid criminal prosecution, etc. I think 300 to 350,000 total Russian KIA is now entirely plausible. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know how to go about assessing and evaluating the number of deaths that the Russians have suffered as a result of the insane decision to go to war by Putin. But it is a lot, right? Whether it's 219,000, whether it's 300,000, who knows? But the numbers are staggering, and this is going to be hurting Russia. This far outstrips what took place in Afghanistan. So what's the difference, given that Afghanistan deaths precipitated the end of that war and the pulling out of the Russians there? Is it that this is just much more existential? There's much more at stake here. Pulling out of Afghanistan was kind of like, meh, whatever, but pulling out of Ukraine and the publicity that this war has garnered worldwide, would this just be political suicide for Putin to now pull out, that he's willing to sacrifice that many more Russians to the altar of his imperialist objectives? And now, talking about troop losses in occupied Tokmak, a Ukrainian strike reportedly hit Russian taxi drivers transporting Russian soldiers returning from leave in Rostov. Lots of casualties are reported separately. Another military taxi was run over by a Russian MTLB near the scene. The driver and two passengers there were killed. So I'm not sure what struck here. It's a really interesting place to hit. So this is a hit in Rostov. So this is in Russia, and this will be too far for HIMARS. And yet, if you look at this video here, you've got a hole in the hole here that looks like, I mean, you've got a car that's been hit. You've got a hole there. I mean, I don't understand how this has happened and really what's happened. But you've got a point where lots of troops accumulate in order to come back off leave and get taxis back to wherever. And that has been struck. Yesterday, the AFU caught Russian taxi drivers with SVO soldiers who they regularly drove from vacations to Rostov. The attack, how was the attack carried out? They were caught. There are 200 and 300, so there are apparently, considerable numbers of deaths and injuries. But also, weirdly, at the same time, in the same place, a few dozen meters away, their comrades themselves ran over another taxi with military personnel, a 55th Regiment, in a Lada. The driver and 2 passengers died. So their own APC then ran over a Russian taxi with soldiers inside. I mean, it's just like a nightmare. I don't know whether there's panic because there were missile strikes or something. Like, what was striking there? Anyway, I just find the whole thing quite bizarre and yet very interesting. Now we've got caught on video here. The most Russian video you'll see all day, says this NATO source. A commander from the Russian 155th, so they're the Naval Infantry Brigade. Yeah, that brigade, they say here. They are crack troops operating up, or at least they were up in Kursk, getting a real bloody nose up there. They've had their officer hierarchy decimated in strikes on on Koronovo, actually, more recently, but also Rilsk previously. They lost their, I think, deputy leader. I can't remember. I gave you the list the other day. Anyway, here we have one of their commanders just shooting, caught on drone camera here, shooting one of his soldiers and killing him just in a trench. Obviously, I don't know whether it's some argument, whether this is someone that was wanting to desert, just shoots him. I mean, that is what's going on in the Russian army, and that is, I think, fairly indicative. Right, now we're going to move on to equipment, and we're going to have some bad news for the Ukrainians first. So we're going to start off with, oh dear, this sucks. Now, I reported yesterday that the Russian MOD declared a Ukrainian vessel had been sunk by using an unmanned surface vehicle that struck the vessel in the Danube River estuary, which is, if it's true, and it does seem to be entirely true, that is, or we're not sure about whether it's fully sunk. We know, well, we'll come to that. For a Russian USV to get that far and get into the Danube River estuary is shocking for the Ukrainians. So this is a bad bit of news, not just from losing a very new ship, but also the Russians having that kind of capability. So the Russians hit a Ukrainian vessel, killing 1 crew member and injuring others. So the Navy has admitted this. Russia attacked a Ukrainian Navy vessel, killing 1 crew member, injuring several others, according to Dmitry Platenchuk. Then actually we saw so I think this is the vessel, a 2021 vessel, if I'm correct. This is a reconnaissance vessel, so it's going to be packed full of really important radars and sonar probably, and all sorts of equipment that's going to be highly valuable for the Ukrainians. We confirmed the fact that of the ship being hit, the elimination of the consequences of the attack is currently underway. In other words, we're trying to sort it out. 1 crew member died. And then the Russians released a video of this from above. So footage shows the moment the Ukrainian Navy's small reconnaissance ship Simferopol was struck by the Russian naval drone around midnight in southern Odessa region. The attack was coordinated by an Orion reconnaissance strike drone. That's the one you're seeing from here. Reports say the vessel suffered a major breach and rolled onto its side, although this is unconfirmed. So it's very difficult to know what the actual outcome was because videos cut and you're not quite sure. But here you can see where the cursor is pointing, the USV, as it approaches the larger smudge there, and the big explosion, the larger smudge being this ship. It's very difficult to see what actually happened to the ship, but that was a significant explosion. There's no doubt about that. And what happens to the ship, we don't know. But I would assume it is in a lot of trouble. And it may well have sunk, or may well have listed onto its side or something, it suffered a major breach and rolled onto its side. I mean, I think that's the end of that vessel if it's rolling onto its side. Then we have footage that was released by the Russians from the drone's point of view. So this is footage has emerged directly from the surface kamikaze drone at the moment it struck the Simferopol. So you can see the Simferopol. Yes, it's a small ship compared to like a destroyer, a frigate or something, but it's a significant ship packed full of lots of really important equipment there. And this drone just is very easily able to go right up to the ship. In fact, someone was just looking over the side to see it approach there. That's incredibly worrying that a USV can do that in that place. So that's not good for the Ukrainians. Then we have another video that's not good for the Ukrainians as well, although we're unsure what the true damage was. Here we have Russian forces managing to track the full launch sequence of a Ukrainian R-360 Neptune cruise missile. So this is probably the long Neptune that we've been hearing about. And we can see from the video that the Russian reconnaissance here clocks the launcher sending a Neptune into the air, which is interesting in itself. So we know the Ukrainians are using the Neptune missile. Then we have the strike of a missile, and as no report says, reportedly this is in Zaporizhia region, an Iskander missile with a cluster warhead followed the launch of that Neptune, damaging the launcher. Though there was no direct hit, shrapnel caused one of the missiles to ignite. So let's play this through now without the music, obvs. And it appears that shrapnel it just suddenly cuts. You've got an exploding missile there, and you can see all the dots. Let's make this bigger. I try not to because I get in trouble, but you can see all of these dots around here. These are the result of shrapnel pummeling the ground around. So you see there, that shrapnel then hits. You've got the launcher around here, and then it's supposed that the shrapnel then started the launch of the missile, ignited the missile. So it doesn't take off, but something happens, and luckily it doesn't fully explode either. But that is interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, the Ukrainians are using R-360 Neptunes. Don't know if it's a long Neptune, but could well be. They're using these Neptunes, so that's and they're using from Zaporizhia, so that's an interesting point. The Russians are still able. We haven't seen this for some time. So yesterday, I read you that tweet from War Vehicle Tracker. It was like, do you know what? The Russians haven't hit anything of high value for a long time. And then lo and behold, as soon as he said that, they released a video, and then this video as well today. Was it the Russian naval vessel, the Ukrainian naval vessel we've just been talking about, and then this one? So suddenly the Russians have a couple of things to shout about, and this means that they are still able to use reconnaissance drones effectively. So you had the Orion drone from the naval vessel that was filming it from above, and then here you've got some other long-range reconnaissance drone getting behind Ukrainian lines and spotting for this missile strike. That is going to annoy the Ukrainians, no doubt. They might have lost a launcher there. It's hard to say. It looks like they've lost a missile, and there is a knowledge that the Russians are checking them out. Now, that's the bad news for Ukraine. Then a whole bunch of good news for Ukraine. And I almost did a breaking news update on this last night. I just had to go to the pub with my mate who was down for, he comes down once a year. So, that happened. 17 Russian air defense, electronic warfare and radar systems were hit by the SBU in less than a week. To achieve such a striking result, the special forces of the SBU's CSO-A, so the Alpha unit, needed only 4 days. The total value of the equipment on the Russian domestic market alone exceeds $250 million, and for exports, 2.5 times more expensive. So the Ukrainians have accounted for 4 Tor M2 surface-to-air missile systems, 3 Pantsir missile gun systems, 2 S-300 surface-to-air missile systems, 1 Buk M3 surface-to-air missile system, a 5 ON6 S350 radar, a Castor 2E2 radar, a Podliot radar, a Jitel electronic warfare system, a Nebo SVU radar, and a 55ZH6M Nebo M radar complex. So Nebo SVU and a Nebo M. I mean, this is really, really highly valuable stuff. Now, I'm wondering whether if this is separate from everything that Primari have been doing in Crimea. This is absolutely staggering. Now, I don't yet have the visual evidence of this, but the claim has been formally released by the Ukrainians here that the SBU hit 17 Russian systems in 4 days, equating to over $250 million worth of kit. But remember, it's not just the monetary value, it's a functional value, because they might not be able to rebuild some of this stuff or build it at all. Now, on top of this, we appear to have another video coming out this morning from the Primari unit I was talking about, striking a valuable Russian radar complex, the 991 N6E, which is part of the S400. That's a Triumph. That's a very best system that they effectively use. They do have an S500 that they have created, but there are rumors that they only have one of those kind of prototyper, I guess, that was taken down to Crimea, and it has been hit. In fact, there have been claims it's been hit several times, elements of it. So anyway, so the S400 is functionally the best air defense system they have, and this one is taking a beating, or at least the radar. If you don't have the radar, you can't acquire the target, so the launchers are fairly useless. Again in Crimea. So Crimea has seen, and to be perfectly honest, like these attacks are probably the outcome from these kind of claims that you're seeing on a nightly basis. So N-Strike and Visioner and these sources often produce images like this to suggest Crimea is being hammered. Breaking at this moment, a massive Ukrainian drone attack is underway against Russian military facilities located in Crimea, and launches of Neptune cruise missiles. So that's from Zaporizhia. So that's a Neptune cruise missile that was spotted, potentially, have also been recorded in the direction of the Crimean Bridge. But we never really hear much about what happens on a nightly basis. What we tend to hear, I think, is the summary of these strikes that happen night after night. And you're thinking, God, Crimea has been absolutely hammered. And you're thinking, well, have they been hammered? Like, where's the evidence of this? And then suddenly, like, we hear that in 4 days, $250 million worth of kit's been taken out. And then Primari have produced another video of another radar being destroyed or damaged or whatnot. So my conclusion is that the Ukrainians are doing an awful lot of damage very consistently every night to Russia. And at some point, there's going to be no air defense capabilities left on the Crimean Peninsula. Like, this is happening so often that, then the question is, what does this lead up to? Like, where's this going? So, all of these air defense systems protect Crimea. What are the eventual targets that Ukraine are wanting to hit in taking out these air defense systems? Or does it lead the Ukrainians to be able to start thinking about using airplanes, like jets, nearer to Crimea, so they can hammer Crimea with missiles from their planes? I don't know. Is it the Crimean Bridge? Suddenly, like, once you've completely taken out the Russian air defenses on Crimea, is that doable? Can they do that? Well, they seem to be doing a pretty good job. Then is it a case of the Crimean Bridge being open season on Crimean Bridge? Right, Ukrainian defenders have fought off a massive Russian assault, says Anton Gerashenko. But even here, I wonder whether there has been a change in appreciation of what massive means. The Ukrainian defenders fought off a massive Russian assault and didn't allow a breakthrough in the Ukrainian defensive line in the Seversk direction. 81st Separate Air Mobile Brigade have fought off Russian soldiers attempting to break through using aviation, artillery, combat and FPV drones. What's interesting there is the mixture of things being used to stop the Russian attack. Our defenders destroyed 4 Russian APCs and about 30 Russian soldiers. So some fairly considerable losses for the Russians there. But is that a 30 vehicle attack by the Russians, like we saw maybe in Avdiivka, 30 to 50 vehicles attacking? No. Almost certainly not. Was it 30 to 50 unarmored vehicles involved in that? Well, it doesn't seem to be caught on camera, so I can't see any motorcycles or whatnot. Is a massive attack just 6 or 7 vehicles these days? Is that? And what does that tell us about the state of the Russian capabilities now, or the capacities of the Russians in terms of mechanized equipment? Now, I reported this to you in a breaking news update yesterday. Ukrainian military intelligence operatives destroyed key infrastructure at the Tver railway junction. So this is 1,000 kilometers into Russia. So you've got operatives in a daring early morning operation planting explosives beneath tanker cars, then remotely detonating them and recording it all, and then severely disrupting rail logistics deep within occupied territory, especially since apparently that fire then spread to the station. This is a really successful sabotage operation, but how the hell are they getting people to do this 1,000 kilometers into Russia? Are these Russians? Are these pro-Ukrainian Russian saboteurs and partisans? Are they Ukrainians that are getting all that distance back into Ukraine? Into Russia? I don't know. But great success there. Then talking about railway strikes, to think just a few months ago, says Intel Schizo, there was almost 0 attacks beyond relay boxes being burned and 4 attacks by drones on trains. Now it's dozens, with over 20 in the past 35 days, and I'm still mapping out all the sabotage incidents, which are mainly in eastern Russia. But then, I don't even know if Tver's not even on this map. It's too far north for there. But look at what is going on. The Ukrainians are definitely, explicitly doing this to the Russians. That's within occupied territory. So that's the Tokmak to Volnovakha railway line there. And then Melitopol down to Jankoy. Jankoy's been hit a number of times. Just quite incredible what's going on. This is... so Tver, I think is might be that one. Incredible. You look at these. I presume they're not all drones, right? Some of these will be sabotage at least, or maybe all of them, maybe most of them. Sabotage operations carried out by partisans of some type or another. Just incredible. And look, that's going right to the far east as well. Just incredible what Ukraine have been able to achieve recently, and that is in response to the attacking in Tver there, as you can see. So good stuff from Intel Schizo. Right, what else? Ukrainian aviation is absolutely shellacking here. A building in Tetkino. The reason I'm including that, I could show you a number of different guided glide bomb attacks from the Ukrainians. The Russians obviously doing this too, but Tetkino, I just thought it was interesting that they are still operating up in Tetkino and still hitting Russian military infrastructure there. Don't know what the end goal is for Tetkino. Tetkino is this village town up on the Kursk border, very edge of the Kursk border, up near where they're attacking into Sumy, the Russians. The Ukrainians attacking into Kursk, and the Ukrainians were having some success there. It's been fairly stable as of late, but they're still operating up there, obviously, to some degree. Now, here, Dnipropetrovsk region highway is now under constant attack by Russian drones. This is a road from Pavlohrad towards Donetsk region. Now, I'm including this. This reminds me somewhat of what's going on around Kherson. The M14 highway up to Mykolaiv from Kherson is being attacked by Russian drones, and those drones are... I guess there are going to be some medium range drones there. This is surely going to be medium range drones. Dnipropetrovsk region highway, constant attack from Russian drones. The Russians are evidently not having a problem with striking civilian targets. We know that for sure. They are taking out loads of lorries and cars and trucks and whatnot going along the M14 highway, but also it appears up in Dnipro as well. Now, talking about medium range drones, so sort of not your FPV drones that are going to go 20, maybe 30 kilometers. We're talking, 50, 100 kilometers, Lancet kind of territory here. Roy, who's a great source on Twitter, Canadian OSINT source, says, should some of Ukraine's resources for long-range drones, so kind of like the FP1 drones, the Beaver drones, the Lyuty, should some of those resources for long-range drones be dedicated to middle-range strikes? Ukrainian Serhiy Flash Beskretsnov reviews this idea. Quote, I've often heard from fighting generals a wish to shift the priority from deep strikes to middle strikes and the near zone. So this is somewhere where Russia, I think, have been doing fairly well over the course of the war because of their Lancet drone. Ukraine has been desperately trying to find an equivalent to the Lancet. They've got the Ram drone and other X-wing drones of their own manufacture that they are hopefully bringing to bear at the moment. Anyway, to continue, quote, there are many targets in the operational depth of 50 to 200 kilometers for which there are not enough HIMARS. There are equipment, personnel, expensive technical complexes and logistics facilities there. Deep strikes are informationally important, but no one publicly provides information about the success rate of sorties and their efficiency relative to costs. How many sorties were launched? How many reached the target? What losses Russia suffered? What our costs were, what damage Russia sustained, and how quickly the enemy repaired it. That's a really, really important point. I've been talking consistently about, well, if they're sending 100 drones, Ukraine, into Russia at night, why are we not getting battle damage assessment? What is the success rate of them? So if only a couple are actually reaching their targets, is it all worth it, essentially? I don't know. Without all of this, obviously now we're seeing hydrocarbon infrastructure being absolutely hammered, and you're thinking, yeah, there is success there. But, overall, what is the efficiency rate of those long-range drones? And without all of this, we only see a beautiful informational picture, such as a big exploding refinery there. And the near zone, the ability to deliver a much larger warhead, more tangible losses, direct and rapid impact on the front. Perhaps that is why Russians also plan to produce a significant portion of Shahids with radio control, specifically for frontline attacks. So I've said for a long time that Ukrainians should be using Shahid-type drones, those kind of equivalent drones, to hit frontline areas. The Russians have been doing it. They have a great success with those drones not being intercepted because they're too close to the front line. The Ukrainians need to be really working on that themselves. So I completely agree there. All right, talking about distance strikes, the Russians sent in 68 drones, so they had their massive 600-odd drones the night before, and then last night only 68, 46 of which were shot down, so that's somewhere in the 60s percentage of interception rates. Quite a lot getting through, 22 getting through, but don't know where they hit particularly, other than I think Dnipropetrovsk and Konstantinivka. Most of the buildings are now being hit for a second or third time here in Free Donetsk, says Tim White, showing pictures of strikes on Konstantinivka there. And that is really close to the front line. It's absolute hell there. You wouldn't want to be clinging on to life in that city. Right, or town, I never quite know. We're going to go to the night before because we had that record-breaking attack. Just to put it into context. So, 2 nights ago, you had 629 total weapons, total munitions sent into Ukraine. There was 598 drones, and 31 missiles. But the record was still that 741 attack previously. And actually so I was talking about how I think there have been fewer drones sent because their manufacturing must have been hit and the supply chain. But actually, 21st, they had 614 and the 28th. So whether they've restocked their stockpiles and managed to fix up some of those strikes, because they are very quick at fixing things. Druzhba pipeline is a great example of this. Druzhba pipeline's been hit now. It was hit last night again, 4 times in the last few weeks. And each time, so yesterday, the Russians announced that, oil is being pumped to Slovakia and Hungary again, and then Ukraine has hit it again last night. But actually, the Russians are able to fix that really relatively quickly. So when it comes to hitting, say, Yelabuga and the industrial military complex that is manufacturing components for these drones, it can be that you actually do stop the Russians building them, but then they're going to fix that back up fairly quickly. And it's just a constant Sisyphean task of rolling that rock back up, rolling that boulder back up the hill. They just keep having to strike the industrial military complex here. The attack on Ukraine 2 nights ago was the second largest since the start of the full-scale invasion. This is an analysis from Sky News. The last such attack was carried out by the enemy on July the 9th, when 741 targets were 749 munitions were used. So there you go. There's that analysis. And then on the night of August the 28th, so this is again 2 nights ago, Russian attacks. Now the updated figures killed 23 Ukrainians in Kyiv, with the fate of 8 still unknown, 53 injured, and obviously a number of children in those dead. So yeah, absolutely horrific what happened. Now the response to that, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, said, following the barbaric Russian strike, it was important to visit, together with heads of 55 foreign diplomatic missions, the site of ruined residential building in Darnitsky district. At least 14 innocent civilians were killed by Russian terrorists here, including 4 children. So actually a whole number of international delegates straight away visited the destruction in Kyiv, and it's really important they experience that firsthand, that they see the war crimes of the Russians and take that back to their decision makers in whatever country they are from. It's interesting that the Slovakian Ministry of Foreign Affairs wrote this after the horrific strikes. Civilian infrastructure was targeted during last night's airstrikes in Ukraine, resulting in further civilian casualties, including children in Kyiv. Among the damaged buildings is the UDEL building, that's the EU delegation building office, which also hosts Slovak employees. Slovakia consistently condemns attacks on civilians, whether in Ukraine, Gaza or elsewhere. Such actions undermine efforts toward peace and must be pursued with urgency and fairness in our neighbourhood or in the Middle East region. Peace should never be taken for granted. But what next to rightly say here, just via Slovakia's foreign ministry strongly condemned the attack on Kyiv, but it never once mentioned Russia. And this is really typical. We've seen this from the Americans. We've seen this from a number of people who are more and more aligned to Russia. It's like whenever Russia does something disgusting, you talk about it in vague, generic terms and don't ever put the moral culpability on the Russians. And unfortunately, the American White House is doing this. This is Caroline Leavitt giving a moral equivalence to the civilian strikes as to the Ukrainian strikes on hydrocarbon infrastructure. So Ukraine really works hard to strike at specific targets that have military or economic value, and thus military value. They don't strike civilians. The Russians strike civilians, and yet Caroline Leavitt stood up and was like, well, yeah, likewise, the Ukrainians have struck the hydrocarbons. They're taking out 20%. The president's looking at this closely. And you're like, what? What are you doing equating these two things? They are not equivalencies. It's horrific. And then, of course, that just gives the White House permission to do both sidesism and to have Trump say, well, Zelensky's at fault as well in this. It takes 2 to tango. It's just part of this rhetoric, which is horrific. I did a breaking news update on a Portuguese leader saying that Trump is functionally a Russian asset. Good on the Portuguese president for pointing that out. Now, last night, Russia reportedly struck the button. So 2 nights ago, some people were wondering whether it definitely happened. But yeah, the Bayraktar facility was struck 2 nights ago by the Russians in Kyiv. So Russia reportedly struck the Bayraktar drone factory in Kyiv, hitting it twice. The facility suffered significant damage. Despite the war and early attacks, the company, it's not the first time it's been struck, by the way, the company has continued investing tens of millions, training staff and preparing for production. But yeah, so that definitely was hit by all accounts. Now, a question about strike tempos and whatnot. This is Comrade Muzika, Roshan Consulting, saying the big question is whether Ukraine can sustain this strike tempo into the autumn and winter. So what they're doing at the moment, striking hydrocarbons and railways and blah, blah, blah. The strategic aim would be to prevent Russia from repairing damaged facilities and force cumulative degradation of its refining and storage network. In March, Ukraine carried out 8 strikes against critical infrastructure inside Russia, but activity then slowed until August. So I was speaking to Will Teal the other day, and he was saying that coincided with Ukraine trying to prove to the Americans that they're really serious about peace. So they stopped attacking for all of those months. And of course, that gave Russia the ability to regenerate and repair. And it didn't achieve anything anyway, because we're still where we were 7 months ago. There's no difference now. But I guess at the time, the US were kind of, yeah, okay, Ukrainians are doing what they can they are serious about peace, and actually the Russians weren't. I don't know in long term whether it made any difference. This month alone, though, has already seen 15 strikes, suggesting a renewed emphasis on deep interdiction. If sustained, this pattern could significantly complicate Moscow's ability to stabilize domestic fuel supplies. At the same time, Russia will almost certainly respond with strikes against Ukraine's critical infrastructure as the weather turns colder, raising the prospect of another high-intensity campaign targeting energy and civilian resilience. So here you can see the number of places that Ukraine has hit just within August. The main issue, says Tatarigami, is damaged equipment. So this is kind of what Will Teal says. And actually, Will Teal has worked with Tatarigami in doing reports on this. Unlike previous years when Ukraine targeted storage, it is now hitting processing units. Most of the equipment is Western made, not China. Minor damage to general parts can be repaired, but specialized units must be sourced from the West, or, it takes a long time and they are suboptimal, and then you can't process as much. So the Ukrainians are really doing a good job this month. Then, as I've already said, Crimea was heavily targeted, as were other places. There were drone strikes right up into Russia, but we just don't have yet. Again, I keep saying this, we don't have much battle damage assessment of what was successfully achieved by the Ukrainians. Does that mean that the Russians have got good at shooting Ukrainian drones down? Probably that too, but just sometimes we don't hear, and then details emerge later. Let's hope it's that rather than the former. Now, Cape Tarkankut on the western edge of Crimea, there was a fire at night caught on firms. The satellite imagery showing that there were 2 spots of pretty intense fire. Crimean Wind Monitoring Group reported that air defense positions had been targeted. NASA firms satellites recorded fires at 2:10 in the morning and at the Russian air defense positions east of the village of Olenevka. So it looks like the Ukrainians yet again hitting Russian air defenses like we've already seen. A general staff report that Ukrainian forces struck a key fuel pumping station near Naitopovichi, Bryansk region, so just over the border, overnight. The site handles up to 10.5 million tons of diesel per year for Russian military needs. A fire broke out at the facility. Results are being clarified, so yet again hitting the fuel infrastructure. Then we heard last night, literally heard, that Oriel in Russia was being heavily targeted. Explosions were caught on camera there, but we don't know what was targeted and how much damage what might have been done. Russian air defense and electronic warfare systems were active overnight in Oriel, with local sources also reporting multiple fires in the city. So it could be that drones were sent awry with electronic warfare or air defense and landed in the city, or it could be that actual targets that were aimed for were hit. Now, as I said earlier, Hungary and Slovakia resumed oil imports via the Druzhba pipeline, as it was reported yesterday afternoon. MOL, the company operating refineries in Hungary and Slovakia, announced that Russian oil has started flowing in both countries, though it did not disclose details. And then what do we hear? Last night, Russian channels report another drone strike on the Druzhba oil pipeline, one of the main routes for Russian oil to Europe. The pipeline has been repeatedly attacked in recent weeks. Hungary even banned Ukrainian commander Magyar over his alleged role in the latest strikes. And we're going to look at that in a second. So Peter Shihato banning Magyar from setting foot in Hungary. Okay, so Russia's main oil terminal to lose 50% of exports due to Ukrainian drone strikes. So remember, Ust-Luga was struck the other day. Industry sources confirm Russia's Ust-Luga terminal will process 350,000 barrels daily in September following Ukrainian attacks on pipeline infrastructure. That's 50% less. And you've also had, was it 2 rather than 5 ships were loaded the other day. So, the Russians are really, really struggling here. Russia's Ust-Luga terminal will operate at around 50%. So, bad news for the Russians there. Okay, now let's move on to other bits and pieces, and we will start with satellite images of the Morozovsk military airfield. The Russians there are preparing to step up their bombing campaign against Ukraine. Why does Max 25 think this? Well, at the airfield in Rostov region, so fairly close to Ukraine, they built 18 protective hangars for tactical combat aircraft. The structures are designed to house 2 separate types of plane, the Su-34 and the Su-24MR. These are now being housed in protective bunkers or protective buildings. Now, this is something that the Fighter Bomber Telegram channel has been asking for as a Russian pilot for the entirety of the war. They have 3.5 years into the war finally started protecting their planes. This is going to be a challenge for the Ukrainians. These will be really high value targets. Doesn't now mean that they're going to have to hit one of these buildings with something like a Neptune missile or FP5 Flamingo missile. I don't know. We shall see. Do you expend one of those missiles on a single plane? Well, probably. I think the plane's going to be costing more than the missile. Now, I talked to you about this case the other day, but there's some more detail that came out about it. Absolutely insane. So a Russian soldier slashed the throat of a Ukrainian POW. They thought he was dead, but he wasn't. Vladislav crawled for 5 days to safety after being thrown into a pit with 7 tortured comrades. Now he wants revenge and is willing to return to combat. The Russians captured him near Pokrovsk and dragged him into a blood-soaked basement. There he saw 700 other captured Ukrainian soldiers on their knees, with their hands tied. Vladislav was the 8th in line for torture. The first reconnaissance boys were captured, had their eyes gouged out, lips cut off, male organs cut off, ears and nose. He wrote in his journal as he can't speak now due to the injury. When the Russians left, Vladislav escaped from the pit. He used a broken bottle to cut his restraints and survived by drinking mice blood during his journey to Ukrainian positions, arriving with maggots crawling in his infected wounds. Now he is recovering in a Dnipropetrovsk hospital with a tracheotomy, supported by his wife and brother, while also dreaming of seeing his 4-year-old daughter again soon. Wow. Just incredible, but shows you how disgusting the Russian army is, how systematically they torture Ukrainians. Now, talking about Magyar being banned, so Peter Shihata said, in response to the latest Ukrainian strike, this is Foreign Minister of Hungary, against the Druzhba oil pipeline, the Hungarian government has decided to ban the commander of the military unit responsible from entering Hungary and the entire Schengen area. I'm not sure they can do that. I don't know that the Hungarians can ban Peter Magyar from the entirety of the free movement of people area, the Schengen area of Europe. Anyway, this was an attack on Hungary's sovereignty, endangering blah, blah, blah. Radoslav Sikorski, the foreign minister for Poland, has said, while Russian missiles rain death on Kiev, Hungary bans a brave ethnic Hungarian who dares to fight for Ukraine's freedom. Commander Magyar, if you need some R&R and Hungary won't let you in, please be our guest in Poland. That is absolutely on point. Magyar himself then responded in a video or in a recording to Peter Shihata, to the Hungarians. And this is what he said. So he hit out against Hungary's leadership with a ruthless response. Quote, shove your sanctions into your ass, you dancers on bones. I am a Ukrainian and I will arrive in the homeland of my father long after you've gone. True Magyars in Hungary are many, and one day they'll be sick and effing tired of you. Remember the black and white position of an ethnic Hungarian, commander of the Ukrainian birds. You are not defending the sovereignty of Hungary, you are defending your own dirty pockets by buying filthy cheap raw materials. You are complicit in the money that builds the rockets aimed at our peaceful homes. Your hands are soaked in blood up to the elbows, and we will not forget it. The birds will always defend their nest. Boom! Drop that mic. That is Magyar just telling it how it is. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Peter Shihata. Brilliant stuff from Magyar there. Love it. And indeed, Kiev has summoned Hungary's envoy to protest the entry ban for the Ukrainian commander of Hungarian descent. So good stuff there from Poland, from Magyar, and from the Ukrainians. Now, Russian drones are apparently flying over Germany to surveil US and allied supply routes into Ukraine, says the New York Times. Concentrated in Thuringia, which is an area where the AfD are very strong, so there's a lot of pro-Russian sentiment around there. Russian drones map weapons corridors. Officials warn Moscow seeks to disrupt aid through future sabotage operations. Intelligence aid, summarizes Timothy Milovanov here, intelligence may aid Kremlin sabotage and support Russian troops in Ukraine. US and German officials discuss plots leading to May arrests of 3 Ukrainians. Russian sabotage in Europe has sharply declined in 2025 after peaking in 2024. Russian attacks in Europe surged 4 times in 2022 to 3 times in 23 to 4, but fell to just 4 incidents in early 2025. The drop is linked to tighter European security and Ukrainian peace talks. General Grinkovich credited, so he's the American NATO leader, credited robust law enforcement efforts for curbing sabotage, and the US has warned Germany of explosive devices planned for cargo planes crossing its territory, leading to arrests. Devices were addressed to Ukraine though targets remain unclear. Some surveillance drones were Iranian-made, possibly launched from ships in the Baltic Sea. Drones may launch from ships, though US officials can't confirm this. Germany is installing anti-drone systems at bases due to high risk. Drones track weapons makers and shipments through Poland to Ukraine, enabling future Russian sabotage of supply chains. Interesting and scary stuff there. Now, on to Russia's economy. India's Russian oil imports are to rise in September despite 50% US tariff. According to Reuters, 3 trading sources involved in oil supplies to India said Indian refineries would increase their purchases of Russian oil in September by 10 to 20% compared with August. So even with a 50% tariff, it's obviously worth them still continuing to do that. But Russia's economy has slowed, according to Bloomberg, to a pace below even the most modest forecasts. Russia's GDP grew by 1.1% in the first 7 months of this year. This is slightly above the lower limit of central bank forecasts for 2025, which expected the economy to grow from 1 to 2%, so 1.1% is above it over the course of the year. However, in July, GDP growth slowed to 0.4% compared to June's 1%. And industrial production growth also slowed to 0.7% from 1.9% amid a slowdown in the manufacturing industry. GDP growth for the year is expected to be around 0.7% if the current pace continues. So it's looking bad for Russia, in so much so. And I've had I've had pro-Russian simps on my channel like debating this and claiming no, Russia's strong, it lasts forever, blah blah blah. But the Russian newspapers are telling you about it. So Russia, quote, Russia's economy is rapidly approaching freezing point, warns one Russian newspaper today, adding, quote, the economy risks going into the red. Another paper reports Russia's education ministry has sent schools a list of patriotic songs for children to learn. So in the face of declining economic joy, let's just sing patriotic songs to get us through the day. Now, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has revealed that Russia no longer insists on controlling all 4 annexed Ukrainian regions. Instead, Moscow is now seeking to hold the current front line in Zaporizhia and retain 25 to 30% of Donetsk. So that's going back in Donetsk. I need some more details on this because this is quite incredible. So Hakan Fidan also confirmed the strategic adjustments are underway. Don't know what's going on there. Now, we hear from The Atlantic that Trump has directed some frustration at Zelensky in Europe, believing they are being unrealistic in their demands and need to accept that Ukraine has to lose some territory to end the conflict. Trump just wants the war to end. It doesn't matter how. That's the claim. So Clash report saying US officials said to The Atlantic, Trump just wants the war in Ukraine to end. It almost doesn't matter how. Doesn't care if Ukraine gets screwed over as long as it finishes. And he said that explicitly. He said a quick peace negotiation is better than a ceasefire. It's better than a long drawn out thing that will arrive at a just outcome. He doesn't want a just outcome. He couldn't give a monkey's arse. He wants a quick outcome. He wants a quick peace because he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. Now, at the same time, the US has deported 30 Russians, but these are Russians who are against the war. They are deporting them back to Russia because ICE is doing what ICE does. One of them was a deserter. So there are now claims that these people are getting interrogated, i.e., probably tortured. Russian opposition media has called these people refugees, and the US has sent them right back into the lion's den. That is despicable. And I'm going to lead you because it's been another very long one. So much is happening at the moment. I'm sorry these videos are much longer than they used to be. It's just that so much is happening. I'm going to lead you with the heartbreaking, imagery of a dog at his owner's home. The owner is deceased, and this is in Kiev, pining for his owner. It's not just people who are affected, of course, animals, ecosystems, culture, history, buildings, architecture, infrastructure, art, humanities. Everything is affected by war. Slava Ukraini.